would just have a little introduction to why horses, but also what I noticed in doing a bit of research about our panellists tonight is that you all seem to have enjoyed a considerable amount of support from family. And I'd like you to maybe talk us through what the key features are of that support and what matters to you in that respect. So shall we go ladies first, Becky?
Oh, why, thank you. So I have ridden since I was tiny. I have two older sisters and they both had horses, ponies, before I was even born. And I got my first pony when I was 4. She was the most gorgeous 10-2 strawberry roan called Kelly. And, it was the family support that I have had throughout my whole journey that started right back then that has definitely been massively instrumental in the path that I've taken. And I quite simply wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't for them. Especially my sister Hannah, who is actually 9.5 years older than me. She had gone away and got an excellent degree in fine art and then came back and decided that she'd rather do horses and ponies than art. Two slightly crazy careers. It was like, which crazy one are you going to pick? She was actually already back and sort of starting to build up the business when I left school at 16, which was quite a big deal because my family is quite academic. My dad had gone to Oxford, he'd worked in business and, both sisters had done university and things. So it was quite a big thing for me to go, okay, I'm going to quit all that now and play ponies. But they were absolutely incredible. And, Hannah and I built up the business with huge amounts of support from my parents. And, they have continued to support me largely now emotionally rather than financially. In the earlier days, it was definitely, financial support that enabled us to get going. But now it is actually the emotional support that is the most important bit. Because what we do is tough. It has incredible ups and spectacular downs. But I think actually one of the things that I really believe is I try to stay quite level. I try to not go too high when it's great so that I don't go quite so low when it's a little more tricky. And I think that's something that my family have really helped instill in me. So I had my parents and Hannah in Paris with me this year, which was amazing, really amazing. Yeah.
Super. I actually couldn't find anyone attached to Becky who was going to say anything other than positive things. She maybe pays them all. No, fantastic. Ben?
What are the negative things you've got people to say about me and Warwick?
You haven't taken your top off yet.
I've got layers on. I'm like a pasta parcel.
Oh.
Right. So for me, it's as fairy tale as it possibly can be, really. I describe my life as a sort of perfect storm. I've stumbled through it completely clueless and managed to land on my feet or be put back on them every time it's gone. I grew up on the farm that my father grew up on, that my grandfather grew up on, and so on and so forth, surrounded by men as a horseman from day one. So my grandfather, he's 97 now, he's still going, he's incredible. He left school at the age of 12 to work the land with horses during the Second World War and learnt a lot, not only about carriage driving and working with horses. And the reason I say that, in this instance, when I talk about working with horses, I mean truly working, not doing it as a hobby as many of us do now. And I'm not saying that's anything wrong, but there's a completely different relationship. Something that's, as I've spent more time in America, I've seen out there as well. And I think that's where a lot of my horsemanship came from, because obviously the best horses were gone and they still had to get the job done. So that's sort of where the first aspect, my obsession with carriage driving and breaking and training young horses, comes from there. Then my father, the next most brilliant influence, my father was a show jumper. My father and grandfather diversified from dairy and arable into doing horses for film, TV and live events. I'll give you a quick breakdown on that, because how on earth does that happen? We'll do this in 30 seconds. My my mother is and I'm going to swear here, a townie. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's mortifying. And due to her towniness, that's actually what it set all on the road, because my father was show jumping, and he was never John Whittaker, but he did well enough that people wanted lessons. And so he was getting more and more involved in the horses and hated milking and hated driving tractors and wanted desperately to do horses. But of course, we all know, if any of you have anything to do with farming, your parents would sooner you fell off a cliff than give up the farm and give up doing what they're doing. But my mother was like, well, just change your job. Like, it's normal. So they started a riding school, and some people came one night and said, we do battle reenactments, but we'd like to get better at riding horses. Could we have lessons on your horses? And so Dad said, yeah, absolutely, we're Yorkshire, money's money, here you go. And from there they said, is there any chance we've been let down? Is there any chance we could hire the horses we ride in the lessons to ride in this battle? So the 410 and the 12 bore came out the gun cabinet. We made flags out of silage wrap and drums out of old milk churns with stuff over the top. The war horses were trained and off they went to battle, and it went well enough that day that someone came up to my father at the end of the day and said, I'm very impressed with those horses. Is there any chance I could hire them to do exactly what they've done here but on a film? And thus a business was born. And so I grew up in this insane world. I started out showing. I won my first rosette in a lead rein class at 23 months old. I was promptly discharged from another first ridden class on my Shetland at 4 when I was... I'd seen my dad doing showing on the working hunters, so everybody else did their walk and trot show. I did walk, trot, canter and gallop down the long side.
Naturally.
Of course. And then sort of got into show jumping. We won't go down all of that yet. But then always had these strong male role models, where people would be like, oh, I can't believe you ride, that's for girls. And I'm looking round at home at these 6-foot jacked stuntmen riding horses, being like, they ain't girls, definitely not. And so what I would say the biggest gift I had, of course, the horsemanship from my father and my grandfather and the surrounding community, but then really was the removal of the idea that something was impossible and that would be an obstacle. Because I often say, if you're on your yard with your horses and you see your friend Sally can jump a cross pole on her horse, so you think, I'm scared of doing that, but I can do it because Sally can do it. Well, I grew up in a world where people were rearing horses on film sets and getting them to lay down or charging into burning villages, and so I always knew deep down that any failure I had with a horse was my failure as a communicator, not that it wasn't possible or not that it... So yeah, that's sort of where my chaotic childhood with horses. I then saw the great Lorenzo. For anybody who doesn't know, if you've been to Hoys or Olympia, Lorenzo, Frenchman, stands on the white horses. Jean-Francois, Frenchman, on the floor with the white horses. I saw him, he was standing on 2 white horses, and with goodness knows how many others, and being about 8 or 9 years old at the time, I had 2 white jumping ponies, and thought, well, the horses being white is the important part. And so gave mum and dad a heart attack. They came out, I was stood on them. This led to me having an apprenticeship with a Cossack-trained stunt rider named Guido Louis, and there's a whole backstory with that. Guido's Indonesian Dutch. We can get into that if we need. But anyway, crazy times. Apprenticed under him from 13 to 16, and then started my own performance team. And then, yeah, many things happened over there. But I'm going to give Warwick a shout out because actually it was a bourbon-fueled conversation at 2 a.m.
How old were you?
A year ago.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to be like 14.
That is the reason you are now all subjected to the Ben Atkinson method, or BAM, online, because Warwick was like, mate, you need to get this online so more people can see it. So thank you very much, Warwick. But yeah, there's my childhood growing up with horses, and then of course when I say it's the perfect storm, like I also did ballet and musical theatre. Did ballet from being about 4 to being about 10. Musical theatre from being 4 to being about 20. And that's all fallen into place to actually make a life and a career out of something that we never knew, how that was going to turn out.
Extraordinary. Warwick?
If anybody, did anybody see Ben's umbrella act from last weekend? If you
Yes, we did.
If you haven't seen
Yes,
that,
we did.
If you haven't seen that, you need to. It's one of the coolest things I've ever seen done with a horse. But you'll see where the ballet and the stage stuff and the horsemanship and the whole bit came together.
And the misspent youth.
Yeah, and the fishnets.
It really is worth a watch.
Diamante fishnets.
So your question here is why horses? And, you know, Ben alluded a couple of times in his little talk then about, he didn't actually say these words, but it's like everything happens for a reason. And I grew up on a farm in Australia, 1,200 acre sheep and wheat farm, and we had horses. So we rode horses all the time. But I was a very unremarkable child, put it that way. You know, as far as I wasn't good at sports, I was pretty good academically, I think, but I wasn't good at sports. So, you know, like when you, I don't know if they do it in the UK, but in Australia, when you know, in school, you're going to have it, we're going to play, whatever you're going to play, soccer or what you call it, football. Like we'll pick two captains and they will pick, you know, one kid, you know. So I was always one of the last sort of kids to be picked.
Me too.
But the horses, probably because I'd been doing it, you know, since I was little, it came easily. And, you know, I probably wasn't one of those last kids to be picked. And so I think just maybe the recognition or whatever, you know, that's probably initially what drew me to the horses. I mean, I liked horses, but I don't think I liked the horses more than the fact, I don't know, the horses made me cool. So initially
Ben definitely likes the fact that horses make him cool.
I think that should be the title of your next book. Warwick Schiller, Horses Made Me Cool.
I thought horses made me cool. Yeah, so that was, I'd say that was the original attraction to horses. And then, you know, we grew up with quarter horses. My father rodeoed, so that, you know, they used to use quarter horses for that. And we'd do like the Western shows. And growing up as a kid, the really cool event was the reining. And so that kind of like, well, how can I be even cooler than cool? And so that's, you know, an interest in learning the reining is what led me to America in the first place. And it was a couple of things. Yes, it was a woman. But I went, you know, I'd never been one of those kids that had a lot of self-confidence. And when I went to America initially in 1990, I got a job for a Hall of Fame guy, actually, lucky enough. And I worked for him for a year, and when I was going to leave to go back to Australia, we shook hands on the veranda, and he said, you know what, if you come back, I'll give you a job, because you could do this for a living if you wanted to. And I had never considered that, you know, never considered wanting to do it, never considered I would never be good enough. Right. And kind of like your dad, everything's come along from saying yes to opportunities that arose. You know, your dad didn't go, I want to train movie horses. He's like, I want to make a buck. Yeah. You know, it's something I can do. And initially it was the writing lessons, then it was the reenactment, and then it was the film thing. And my life's been pretty much the same. Nothing I'm doing these days I planned. You know, I was a horse trainer. And then I think there's a great principle in life. There's a magic to the act of giving with no thought of getting anything back from that particular act. And I think it's a very pure act that if there's any, it almost reads you like a horse does. If there's any deception to it, there's any underlying, I'm really going to get something out of this, it doesn't work. But I volunteered to do a reining. We moved back to Australia for a few years, and I volunteered to do a reining demonstration at a big horse expo there. And they had one of those colt starting competitions. They asked me while I was there if I would be the in-arena commentator, you know, like the colour commentator, not the introductions, but explaining to people what was going on in front of them. And, you know, this 3,000 or 4,000 people in that arena every day, 3 days in a row. And after that, I had people contact me and say, "We really like the way you explain things. Would you like to do a clinic?" I'm like, "Well, I've never thought of doing clinics, a bit like your dad, but sure, if you want me to." And then we moved back to America after that. And from a few years of doing clinics, I realised that a lot of people that I'd encountered struggled with really understanding horses on a certain level, and that was what was holding them back. So when we moved back to America, I started putting video clips on YouTube and on Facebook, just to explain some things that I'd noticed that a lot of people didn't understand. And at the time, I don't know if it's the same now, but at the time on YouTube, you couldn't put a video longer than 10 minutes unless you had a certain number of views. You know, they don't want 3 hours of your cat chasing a laser pointer up and down the hallway, you know. And so people said, "We want longer videos." And I said, "Well, I can't put them on there." So I found an online place that would host longer videos, but they're going to charge me $300 a month to put the videos on there. So I had to charge people. And so my business went from training horses to having an online platform and travelling around the world doing clinics. But there's probably two lessons to it, but none of those things I decided I wanted to do. They came up because of opportunities that I said yes to. But if you go back before that, they came because I was giving with no thought of receiving. Like what you guys do with this.
Yeah, very charitable.
And like I said, I really think there's a magic to it that you cannot duplicate if you have any ulterior motives.
Yeah.